entry in the Diary of Doom. I'm Dylan, and join me as we look back on the rich history of doom metal and its sister sounds based on the recounted tales of its followers. Every week, we'll have a different guest to spin their yarn. You can visit the website at diaryofdoom.com, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, follow the podcast on diaryofdoom.podbean.com, and subscribe and listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or whatever shady podcast streaming app you want to use. And if you have a question, want to pitch something, or whatever, you could fire off an email to diaryofdoom1968 at gmail.com. Dario Argento's opera, released in 1987, was my introduction to giallo films and the deeper cuts of Italian horror. While I had already been exposed to the mastery of Lucio Fulci's Zombie 2, or Zombie, however you want to look at it, and Argento's seminal film Suspiria, opera solidified the marriage of horrific visual imagery juxtaposed against ripping heavy metal and eerie synthesizers. Italian filmmakers have a unique approach to their horror movies, and one that I have been enjoying far more as I delve deeper into it. Lamberto Bava's Demons, Fulci's The New York Ripper, Michele Soave's Della Morte dell'Amore, or Cemetery Man as it's known other ways, Mario Bava's Black Sabbath. So it makes sense that Italian heavy metal, embracing the bombast of the genre like a pro, would eventually spawn bands that drew from the horror and macabre. In today's chapter of Diary of Doom, we're speaking with a band who has been around for 35 years and just about to release their debut album. Joining us is Edoardo Napoli, who has stepped up to play guitar in the Italian classic doom band. You might have to help me out here. ExpiatoriaA?
That would be ExpiatoriaA. Wonderful.
So I did okay. So
yeah, you did very well. Hello, Dylan.
Welcome aboard. So I guess my Italian course in college helped out a little bit.
Absolutely, I've heard worse, so be proud of yourself.
Oh man, I shudder to think what could have been worse than that. So Edoardo plays guitar in the band, and like I said, this band's been active for a very, very long time, but just kind of getting around to doing something with it. Just for a little bit of the behind the scenes, previous guest of the show, Enrico, who you may have heard a while back on the podcast, reached out to me again and said, see if we'd be interested in doing something. And I was like, sure, sounded interesting to me. And the band is kind of like a classic vintage heavy metal band mixed in with like the creepy weirdness of like Merciful Fate, and then you get the doom stuff from that, kind of like a Candlemass sound and whatnot. Before we get into the band itself, like, for you, like what are your earliest experiences with music? Did you have a musical upbringing, or was it something that you kind of picked up on a little bit later on in life?
Well, the thing is, I wasn't very keen on doing sports when I was little, because of course I was very prone to get sick. So what other opportunity you have? So I spent most of my days playing guitar by myself, because my dad plays the guitar and my mum was a singer. They've never done that for a career. They just had it as a hobby. But since the very beginning, I found myself with a guitar in my hand or a piano in front of myself. And I always dreamt of having a rock band or a metal band, because rock music in the early 90s was having one of the best moments in our country, and so there was so much interest on that. And yeah, so it's all started by that. I started studying music, and later on I found myself using computers, because I was introduced to the first scoring programs, so I could write music on the computer without having all the knowledge about recording and stuff like that. And that's pretty much how everything started. I met ExpiatoriaA in like 4 years ago, and I was contributing in a pub as a live audio engineer, and I met the band having a gig with a former lineup, and we just clicked in a finger snap. We just became friends. We all gathered together at the bass player's birthday party, and after a week we were just playing together. And so that was the first moment we united. But after a short split, we joined back forces 2 years ago, and that's where we are now, luckily.
So, like, kind of going back to yourself, like you said in the '90s was, at least the Italian music scene was sort of like blowing up. I remember growing up in the '90s, and I kind of remember some of the exports. I think like the big one in the United States was Eiffel 65. Like that band was fucking huge here, like massive success. But like, when did you what kind of drew you to like rock and metal? Like, was it the '90s stuff, or was it stuff from like earlier?
I clearly remember this day. I was 8 years old, and I was waiting for my mom with my dad in the car because she went shopping. And I just kept listening to Queen when I was 6. I had a lot of stuff coming from Albano, and then my dad says, "Look, let's listen to this." And he just put the cassette of Back in Black by AC/DC, and that, man, just blew up my mind. That's how everything started. I just kept listening to AC/DC from that day. And then it's all started with Iron Maiden the year after. I remember being like in a mall, and I bought this compilation named Edward the Great, and that was mind blowing. But I think the most remarkable moment is when I crossed my path with Judas Priest's Angel of Retribution in 2005. That album just changed my mind in a very deep way. Everything that I was listening to just matters as the starting point, but everything was just another thing, and that's how everything started.
I remember like AC/DC, they always played at my high school dances, which I always thought was like kind of weird, but I don't know, it's just kind of funny. But I remember like similarly when I listened to Iron Maiden the first time, I was just like, oh, this is so much better. This is cool.
Yeah, I get that.
Likes this. So AC/DC's Back in Black, like sort of like your landmark album. Did you ever find yourself coming across an album that kind of made you start to think like a little bit more like differently about like rock and metal and heavy music? Like, did you find something where you're like, oh wow, this is like super heavy, there's like a whole other side to this,
Oh yes, there were 2 records actually that made me think about, like you said. The first one was Nymphethamine by Credible Filth. That was mind-blowing back in the days, because I was a teenager, and Danny Phil's lyrics and the fact that this goth music mixed with black metal was just bonkers back in the time. But the true masterpiece of that era to me was Dimmu Borgir's Death Cult Armageddon. That was just too much for a teenager, but at the same time, I remember, we obviously couldn't afford the CDs, and then we had these compilations coming from magazines, and I had to trash the label from the CD. I had to write a fake name because my parents would just get angry because I was listening to the devil's music.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I know the Roman Catholicism and your Roman Catholic, or I'm assuming, I have another friend and she's Italian, and she had joined the Church of the Satanic Temple. That's what it was, and it didn't go over well with the Roman Catholic family. So I could only imagine that like your family was like, absolutely not, no.
Yeah, but once they understood that it's just cliche and just imagery, everything just went well. They embraced my love for metal music, and they now encourage me. So that is very, very important to me.
Well, that's good. Before you wound up joining the band, were you involved in any other like bands or projects in and around the whatever scene you might have been part of? I think you said that you were working as like a sound technician, and that's kind of like what led you to this.
Well, the thing is, my music career was kind of divided into several phases. Of course, when I was 15, I created my first band. You know, the classical cover band that you just create to dive into the world of live music. And we were 15 and we played in social clubs around the area. And we were called Autopsia, which is very positive. And yeah, that's everything. Where everything started. Then I found myself trying to improve my knowledge of the instrument, especially the guitar. And in the same time, I kept an eye on audio production because I thought that studios here are very expensive and you don't really get exactly what you need because you have the vision in your mind. So I was very interested in investing my knowledge in that part. Then after that brief era, I found my proper unreleased band when I was 17, and that's where I met my best friend. And we just went on till I turned 19, I believe. Then I switched to crossover in the style of Audioslave. I played in a death metal band from La Spezia. I've had a plentiful of options, and I even had a short moment of a solo project when I was 20 and before when I was 16. Because I admit, it was very difficult to work with me because I had a precise idea in my mind, and I didn't realize I was being a twat because you sound very presumptuous without realizing it. But the truth is, once you find your dimension with people who share your own mindset, like now, you just go with the flow and everything just works wonderfully. So this different backgrounds allowed me to enlarge my views talking about the guitar. Back in the days, it was just metal, just classic rock. But if you explore with the instrument, you can enlarge your mind and you enjoy music more. That's how I embrace music now. I just see it as like a introspective journey with your ideas. You can't explain your ideas with your voice, but as soon as you grab your guitar and you just start playing, everyone understands you, regardless of what language you're speaking.
I think it goes to show, like, when, you know, they have, like, interviews with guitar players, and like, oh, I actually, like, I'm really into, like, this and that because it helps you to, like, understand a certain aspect of crafting your art or whatever. You know, like, I guess it's not surprising. Like, I always say, like, oh, you know, I was, like, kind of surprised that, like, a lot of people who are into, like, stoner metal are also into, like, dub. And I'm like, well, you know, obviously, like, the pot, but, like, the groove, the rhythm, the repetition, and, like, sort of how that, like, to actually, like, play a live dub sort of is like, kind of interesting, like, in how they're like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of just, like, doing this thing, which is just, they just loop it on a tape or whatever. But I'm rambling. But that's cool. I mean, that is one of the most beneficial things I think about. You know, I don't play music, but I listen to a ton of music, and I really do try to keep it, like, across the spectrum, you know. And so, like, I just have, like, a big playlist that I always add to, and, you know, it'll be like, oh, death metal, stoner metal, black metal, and then all of a sudden, like, a pop song, or like a weird dub song, or just like 80s synthesizer or something like that.
I dig 80s synthesizers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, they definitely show up a bit on the album. So before we get further into the band, you know, like, you know, you're talking about, like, all different kinds of music, and Italy obviously has had a very long history associated. And, you know, like, at the risk of coming off a bit offensive, it makes sense to me that Italy would embrace heavy metal, because I think your culture welcomes that sort of grandiose, dramatic flair that metal and rock offer. You know, it's just like a lot of the famous Italian paintings, just like, you know, I remember being at a museum one time with my mom, and I was like, I really like this one. And she's like, of course you do. It's dramatic, just like yourself. You know,
yeah.
Taking a little dig at me. But that, you know, that said, I still don't have the deepest knowledge of Italian, you know, metal bands, having addressed, like, some of the more well-known ones in my previous chat with Enrico. You know, obviously, like, Lacuna Coil, there's Flesh God Apocalypse, Death SS brought up. I think they might have, like, the most people in a band ever. Like, it's crazy how many people have been in and out of that band. Ufa Mammoth, if we're talking Doom, nice to see that they're back. Dunwich, who I should check out. They sound pretty interesting. They apparently laid a lot of the groundwork for symphonic metal, Rhapsody of Fire, Necrodeath. So, like, do you have any thoughts about the Italian metal scene?
Of course. Well, the good thing about the Italian scene is that it's now waking up. First of all, we have an extensive list of very talented bands. Just think about what we did in the 80s. We had the so-called sacred triad of thrash metal, Italian thrash metal. We had Necrodeath, we had Bulldozer from Milan, and then we have Schizo from Sicilia. Lovely bands. Speaking of nowadays, I've seen loads of talents because, of course, I contribute in the pub. And for example, I've seen a band called Hell Crash, which is mind-blowing. Very talented guys. They play very well. Also, I've listened to Sermonia. They're from the same town I live, and they were absolutely amazing band. Amphria as well from Milan. They play a very strange mix of black metal with drone atmospheres. Very, very good band. And whenever you go, every region you visit, you can get a very interesting band. The thing is, I'm gonna quote something coming back from the 80s when the early times of Italian metal just came to life. Back in the days, our audio engineers were very skilled in pop music, and those were the years of Little Tony or whatsoever. We had the Pooh, loads of Italian bands who were produced by the same label like RCF or whatsoever. So they had precise standards where all the audio engineers were absolutely great in producing that kind of music. But they had no skills to produce heavy metal. So most of the Italian metalhead listeners were just disgusted by the quality of what they were listening to, because it was not the band's fault, it was the lack of knowledge. But if you listen to the Italian bands of that time, like Vanexa, Phil Di Ferro, Strano Ficina, and you just think of the background, of the ideas, of the music itself, it had nothing different, nothing less compared to the British market or the US. We were not just ready for that. But nowadays, all those bands from that era are seeing a new spring, are seeing new fans, youngsters listening to those old bands and finally recognizing the true potential of those bands.
Wow, that's really cool. That's like, I had no knowledge of that. It's really interesting. I was just Black Rainbows, I think, is another one from Italy that I really like. So, well, that's cool. And I imagine like that's kind of what led to this band coming back and kind of having a moment to like actually put some real music down on a record. So like, how did this band come together like back in the day? I mean, considering it's been active since 1987, which actually is also the same year that the movie Opera was released. It's not like, the band hasn't been around. It's just like crazy that the first album is coming out. I know there's been like a couple of EPs, but this is like the first solid release of like new material.
Yeah, well, let's just say that the main factor in this kind of difficult story for the band is misfortune, first of all. The guys were very young and most of them had to go to military service. Someone in the early 90s got injured, they couldn't play anymore. Sometimes they were crossing with people, with members who didn't share the same mindset and objectives. So that led to the band to have a sort of fragmentation. So as soon as they could reach like a sort of arrangement with the lineup and with ideas, they will just record an EP, and that's just a momentum, like a portrait of a situation. It's just, I would say it's like having 5 different bands. Like, yeah, I know the records are signed under the same name, ExpiatoriA, but ExpiatoriA from 1987 is not the same of the 90s. Everything just was different. And I think that what led this album to be possible nowadays is just that probably everyone in the band just stopped thinking as a band, and we just gather together following our instincts and we just decided that it was very important to commit to change some strategies and find a new way to, you know, conceive music. Like back in the days, I think it was more like a showcase of mostly skills and the darkest moods ever mixed together. In this situation, we have decided it was more about the emotion and what was right in that moment, not because it was the most complicated riff that we had to record. And that's pretty much how Shadows was born. Just instinct and six people, six friends all together having a nice time. That's how it should work. And as soon we realized that, we understood that it was possible.
I imagine that like a part of it too is, you know, you've been doing it for a little while, so everybody's like, you know, you're not like there to prove anything to anybody. Like when you're young and you're trying to, you know, make a name for yourself, like so is everybody else, which can kind of lead to like friction and bands and butting heads and like I want to do this, but that's not how I want to do it. I'm not interested, blah 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 blah, whatever. So now it's like, you know, you're a little bit jaded, you're a little bit older, you're like, no, I want to, you know, I know how to like interact with people, and these are people that you creatively vibe with, and you get to work on something that's like, oh, we get to like keep this thing alive after all these years.
Yeah, and a fun fact, I wanna quote Bluetooth because it's very fun. In 31 years that I've been in this strange world, I met Massimo in 2018, as I said, and he's the first guitar player that I don't need to be explained the riff or vice versa. We just connect virtually with a mind Bluetooth, and as soon as he thinks of a riff, I have the complementary part ready just in a glance, and it's also the opposite way. This is what makes a connection possible. It's just not only because you're good at playing and you're a good individual, it's just because there is a common language spoken.
What does the name of the band mean actually? Like what does it translate to?
So, actually, it's a Latin word. It can be considered an adjective or a neutral noun, regardless, because both the words can be read in the same way. It means about the execration of your sins. So it's like something related to the world of sin, because back in the days, the band was very prone to explain those concepts of evil and sin. No wonder why one of the evergreens is called Evocation from the 1990s. But yeah, I think it pretty much sums up what the philosophy back in the years was and what is now. If you think about music, our music is just a way for us to explain our way to be sinners somehow. Because in the end, nobody is perfect, and our inner dark side has to be translated, has to be kind of exasperated in a biblical way. So that's why the moniker fits this description in a good way, in my opinion.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the whole, you know, obviously like from like, you know, like like a thematic and like from a writing perspective, all of like the concept in and around sin is like very interesting. But you know, it does kind of make me always laugh that like people had to come up with this like weird explanation for like basically like why why they shouldn't be horny.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's like if you get a boner, it's the devil or whatever. You know, we were at work yesterday. We were talking about if you're right-handed or left-handed, and how it's so silly that like you used to get beaten with a ruler if you were.
Oh, of course. Well, luckily it doesn't happen anymore. But by my uncles were forced to change their hand because it was considered the devil's hand. So, whatever.
So now you know, you've probably touched on it a little bit, but like the fact that, you know, you were like a fan of this band before and now you're like in it, you know, what like Like, what's that gotta feel like? What does that feel like for you? Like, was it weird at first, or was it like, oh, this is like, this just makes sense?
Well, I must be honest, I've never thought about this, but I'm trying to recall what I felt the first day we decided to join forces. And, well, I would say it was absolutely bonkers because I didn't think the guys would show so much trust, so much interest in what was happening that moment. I just thought it would be like a abnormal jump session, just a thing of the moment. Yeah, I later realized that I was lucky because I said, okay, now I'm part of a band that I really like, which makes wow, which is incredible. But after some weeks, I was told that even though I was the last in line to join forces with the band, and even though I was a fan mainly, I was totally entitled to have my opinion in an equal way, regardless of how quick I was in the band. So yeah, that was absolutely wonderful, and I really remember that day with loads of happiness.
I mean, that fucking rules. Something you mentioned I think is interesting is you said the band that existed in the 80s and then the iteration in the 90s and now kind of jumped around, moved around or evolved in terms of like the sound. And I mean, my only knowledge of the band is this record. It's very much, like I said, vintage metal, like Merciful Fate with the doom, like from Candlemass and whatnot. Like, when you were working on this debut album, what was it like putting it together? And like, were they trying to do something where like we need to like make sure it sounds kind of like the old stuff, or were they like, no, let's just try something fucking new, and if you have something you want to bring to the table, obviously, like, what do you have in mind, like, as a guitar player and whatnot?
Well, the good thing about the whole recording process is that, of course, it was frantic because we were having the COVID situation and we were totally afraid that we would go into lockdown again. So all the recording process just took place in like 2 weeks and we were really in a rush. But the good thing is that we've been talking about the recordings a lot, like before the proper recording started. So we had time to talk about the kind of sounds we wanted, the kind of experimentation we fancied, and when I work in an album, regardless if it's my band or someone else's, I try to depict what I get. So no artifacts, no frills, no changes. Like, if your amp sounds that way, if your sound is the actual one, let's just value what we got. So what you're hearing right now in Shadows is the brainchild of a common effort where we decided to, depict the band sound as it is. So you don't have wrong perspective. Like, you listen something in the album, then you go to the gig and you listen something different. We tried to be consistent in this scenario. And of course, being in 2022, the process and the quality has obviously changed because, of course, 80s recordings were a thing because all the technologies were implemented. And when we thought about our sounds and we chose our guitars, our amplifiers, we wanted something versatile that could sound modern, but with the early 80s warmth and kind of vibe. So it sounds modern and up to date, but somehow puts an eye back in that era, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's got a pretty great spooky gothic atmosphere to it. Obviously I was talking about horror movies at the beginning of the episode and whatnot. Heavy metal has always found a place to exist within that realm. There's so many fucking heavy metal songs just are about ghoulish, creepy, macabre shit, obviously. And there's a lot of appreciation for Italian horror flicks in the heavy metal scene. So like, and this episode is coming out just before Halloween, I think. Like, are you a horror movie fan? Like, are you a fan of the Italian horror movies?
To be honest, I'm not a big fan of movies in general. I know, the basic, I've heard of Piavati, for example, Dario Argento, of course. Everyone watched The Exorcist back in the days. It was the first horror movie, or whatsoever, The Enigmas, Saw, and whatsoever. But my vision of horror is slightly different from the usual depiction. Like, my vision of horror is the exasperation of what we witness every day. Let's say arguments at work, or personal drama, or nightmares. And the few times I wrote some lyrics, or I gave some ideas, or when I write riffs, I try to depict whatever I experience in life in a horror key. And I've seen that it turns out it could be spookier than any possible splatter thing, because fear comes from your mind. It doesn't have to be graphic, or it doesn't have to be about the so-called cliches about horror. You can be horror talking about going to the mall and seeing the lights flickering and seeing someone with a very strange stare chasing you, for example. And maybe you were just trying to explain that you had an argument on the line because the Karen in front of you just didn't want to give your place back on the till.
I imagine there's a lot of like songs out there that, might be like a little bit hard to, pick away at like what it's about from like a listener, but the person who writes probably just like, oh yeah, that's about like some shithead manager I work with that just, like, hovers over people and just like berates them like in a horrible way. So yeah, I that's interesting. It's like there is, I think that's the thing about horror, is it's always meant to be like representative of something else. Like it's always meant to be like a metaphor for some aspect of real life, and the good ones do a good job of like conveying that. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, for me personally though, like I do feel lucky this year, like that I get to see Claudio Simonetti's version of Goblin, and I saw Fabio Frizzi, who did a lot of Fulci stuff earlier in the year. So I feel very lucky that I get to see that. So yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about with the album? Is there anything else we should know about it? Like, it's because it is, like I said, it's kind of a big fucking deal.
Well, I must say that personally, I'm very happy of this album because it was a very simple workflow. And I really like the fact that I had the total trust of the band's members, and there was no problem, actually. And I remember that we all gathered here in my house to perform the final mix and mastering session. And the guys did such a wonderful job that I just applied the settings from the first take session, and I just copied it over all the other songs, and everything just sounded perfect as it was. So this album didn't require a lot of work, actually, because everyone in the band did an amazing job. And, well, yeah, I think this album, in spite of being produced in a rush, and we were very, very stressed about, as I told you, about the COVID thing, just came out very well. Maybe, if we want to say something very frank, if we had more time, for exploring or for more experimentation, maybe it could have came out in another way, in another flavor. Maybe the production could have been different, but we just sensed it then that it was just how it was meant to be. And yeah, I'm very, very satisfied. And everyone in the band, Krieg, Flux, Enrico, Gianni and Massimo, and also the Three Shadows, have just made this album very possible and very wonderful, I would say.
Well, that's really awesome. That's a pretty amazing story, and that's really cool that you were all able to come together and put this thing out. Beyond the new album, Shadows Out, are you working on anything else? Is there future plans for the band?
Well, yes, we have several projects ongoing. Of course, as soon as we released the DTP master for Shadows, we immediately started composing new tunes, which is part of our daily deal. We just, I swear to God, everyone in the band just comes up with an idea every time we gather together in the practice room, and this is just wonderful. This is just bonkers. And of course, we're planning a pretty much intense live gig activity. Of course, we want to promote the album. In the beginning, we will start with Italy, but luckily in the future, we might also see what happens outside our lovely country, which is kind of something we're looking forward. And for now, we got 2 gigs. We have one in November, the 5th in Genoa, together with the Impero delle Ombre, which is going to be a very nice situation. And then we will go to around Vicenza, I guess, and that would be November the 26th. And same scenario, same bands, and we will see how it goes up there in the east, because it's totally different from here. There's no sea, but the people there are just amazing. So we're looking forward to that. And, well, we're just open to see what the future just shows us. We'll try to keep it up as much as we can. And, well, it's just about rock and roll in the end.
Well, speaking of rock and roll, have you been listening to anything lately that you've been really enjoying, whether it's new or old or what have you?
Oh, yes, I fell in love, actually, with Ghost's new album, Impera. That is absolutely one of the most remarkable masterpieces of our era. I think the band really nailed it, because they were able to mix melody with dark moods and an outstanding audio production. That album has all the qualities to just flow easily into your ears, and you don't want to really skip any single song. That's an absolutely good album. And is the new single by Bulldozer. The new single by Bulldozer, The Heretic, is just amazing. A very good song. A very nice song. I actually had a chance to speak to Andy Panigada, the guitar player, when we met in Metal Italia Festival. It was like a month ago, and yeah, we talked about this song, and yeah, we both shared the conviction that that song is exactly in the style of the band. It's catchy, it's loud, and it fits every metalhead's taste. And yeah, the band is in very good shape, I would say.
I think this is the same band. They're playing at St. Vitus Bar by me in a few weeks in November.
I guess so. Just, I'm not sure, but I strongly believe there are no many Bulldozer bands in the world. So we might be sure that we're talking about the same band. So if it's the case, I really recommend you to enjoy the band, because it's amazing.
Maybe I'll go. I'll see if maybe I can get out that night. Let's see. What have I been listening to? It's been a little while, so I've got a bit of a long list. I'm breaking this up. I'll probably touch on some more in the next one. The new album by the band White Hills rules. It's called The Revenge of Heads on Fire. Really good. New Clutch album is out. Sunrise on Slaughter Beach. Pretty short Clutch album, all things considered, but pretty good. Mortuous's album, Upon Desolation, excellent death metal. I was checking out this band. I think I mentioned them a couple episodes ago or something. Lochran, these are the 2 albums they put out this year. Very droney soundscapes, like pretty nihilistic, bleak music. Listen to Innumerable Forms' new album. I listened to the new Mind Force, which is some nice thrashy shit. There's a new Sumerlands album. Freedom Hawk, which is, solid stoner rock. I listened to this band from the 90s. It's like this electronic band called Charisma. Listen to their album Chinese Restaurant. That was really good. This like remix expansion album of by this drummer. His name is Malcolm Kato, and he's incredible, like very reggae and dub influenced, and he did an album with this band called Little Barry. It's called Quatermass Expansion, so that's good. Checked out the new Frail album, Skin and Sorrow, the new Phobophilic. It's pretty sick, brutal death metal. And Al Cisneros put out a new single, new dub tracks, and lastly, I checked out the album Point Blank by Nailbomb. I don't know, I feel like maybe I listened to this before, but I'll say again, fucking incredible album.
I also forgot an important quote, a band I totally fell in love. Not because of their speed metal tradition, which is very much real, but they released a ballad called In Deepest Black, and I'm talking about Evil Invaders from Belgium. This band nails it. For real. Anyway, could you please later email all the bands you mentioned, because I want to flood them in my playlist, because I heard many interesting names, and I think unreleased bands and new music needs to be heard, and I will spread the word about them.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll definitely send you over all those that I mentioned in there for you. No problem.
Thank you so much.
Is there anything else you want to promote or plug for yourselves? Like anything, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, first of all, we decided to arrange a Linktree link, where it would be Linktree /Expiatoria, where we all list our links. So mainly, you can get our music on Bandcamp, so it's the main channel where you get to listen to our works, and where you can do the pre-order, because the album won't be out until November the 12th, so you have time to pre-book your order. And we got a YouTube channel, we got Facebook, and yeah, that's pretty much it. We decided to have few channels where we will flood all the information you need. And yeah, if you find our music interesting and you find that I've not been too much of a boring guy during this interview, just click on the link and enjoy what we have to say, because in any case, you will have the right background for your work, or whether you're driving to your granny or whatsoever. ExpiatoriA is like a beer. No matter how empty or full your life is, there's always time for a pint.
Nice. Awesome. Well, album is out November 12th. Go check it out, and give these dudes a listen. They're a legacy band for sure. Reborn. So thank you for joining us, and that'll do it for this chapter of the diary.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a nice day.
Settling world of blue. feel the face of the moon. When the